Let's get started. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ba'd. All right. We are on section 36, and which we're going to be covering verses 261 to 266. So last week we saw 3 verses that were talking about giving life to the dead and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has power over everything. And now we're going to be talking about charity and intentions. So Allah says in verse 261, مثل الذين ينفقون أموالهم في سبيل الله كمثل حبة أنبتت 7 سنابل في كل سنبلة 100 حبة. The example of those who spend their wealth in the cause of Allah is like a kernel, is referring like a kernel of corn that grows into 7 ears. Each has 100 kernels. So what Allah means is that each ear that grows up, it's going to have 100 kernels in each piece. And that means the reward for charity can be 700 times. So if you think about this, most of you have eaten, a piece of corn before. They call it an ear of corn, like a piece of corn. And the average piece of corn, depending on how big it is, it contains about 700 to 800 kernels in 16 rows. Right. So I know a lot of you probably didn't count it. I didn't count it either. Read this information, but it's exactly what Allah mentions. He's saying you basically take one seed, and this is how you plant corn, anyways, right? So if you take one seed, even if it dries and it gets hard, you put it in the soil, the right conditions, it's going to grow. It's going to grow a corn plant, and what's going to happen is there's going to be several ears of corn growing on there. So from one kernel, you actually got 700 because you got 7 pieces of corn growing on that thing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying is that when people have the sincerity in their heart, when they're spending their money in the cause of Allah means something that Allah is happy with, doing something that Allah is pleased with, and you're using your money for that. Because you can get so much reward. You don't just get one reward, it multiplies so much. And Allah can make it even become 700 times. And it's like the example of that piece of corn. So if you grow something, it's like you just put a little bit of water and the rest just naturally will start growing. And this is like the water is the sincerity, the water in the soil is the sincerity of your intention. The more sincere, the stronger your intention, the more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to cause it to grow. The soil is not good. The water is not good. The circumstances are not right. Something is not right with the intention, right? So Allah mentions this as a good, beautiful example. Wallahu yudha'ifu liman yasha. Allah multiplies to whomever He wills, which means, referring to the reward here, Allah multiplies the reward to anyone that He wants. Now, of course, Allah is going to do that based upon the sincerity of the person, based upon the effort of the person. It's obviously not going to be random because Allah is the all-wise. So He's going to look at the sincerity. He's going to look at the difficulty that you have. So if you have only $20 that you got from Eid, you've been saving it, all right? And then it comes time to help somebody in need, and you give 50% of your entire life savings, all of the money that you've saved up, you give half of that. That's difficult for a lot of people to do, right? So if you give that, that's going to earn a lot more reward than if you have $1 million and you give $10, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to decide which reward does He want to multiply even more. Of course, they're both good, but there's going to be a multiplication based upon the effort, the difficulty, and the sincerity of the individual. Sometimes people will give charity with the wrong intention. The intention is to show off. The intention is to feel good. The intention is something else. You're not going to get. And if the intention is mixed between pure intention, but then I'm getting a really good tax deduction from the US government, pure intention, but at the same time, this is going to help me get some business contact connection that I can use in the future, then Allah is going to multiply the reward less than if you had the 100% pure and clean intention. Wallahu wasi'un alim. Allah is generous and knowing. When it says Allah is generous, here wasi', Linguistically, it means wide. Right? Now, of course, we don't use the word wide. We use wide for physical objects. Right? Allah is not a physical object. There's nothing physical about Allah. So wasi' in this context means that Allah is, He gives spaciously, right? Meaning He gives generously, right? So He gives to those people who deserve it, but He gives a lot. All right? He gives way more than the people who even deserve. So if you deserve this much and you've done something right, Allah will multiply it and give you even more. Right? So this is the generosity of Allah. And He's knowing, which means that Allah knows the good intentions of people, so He's going to be more generous to them and reward them with extra. But He also knows the bad intentions of people. He's not going to be giving them extra, or He's not even going to be giving them reward for any of those things. So it's very suitable to mention these two attributes of Allah at the end of this verse, because it's directly connected with charity and giving of charity and multiplying the reward. The next verse, 262. الذين ينفقون أموالهم في سبيل الله ثم لا يتبعون ما أنفقوا منا ولا أذى لهم أجرهم عند ربهم ولا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. Those who spend their wealth in the cause of Allah and do not follow their charity with reminders of their generosity. Like, here's some money, look how generous I am. Hey everyone, look how much money I gave. Right? Or hurtful words. Here, take this money, hope you choke on it, or something like something really bad, like, here, take this, I know you don't work, or whatever it is. If you don't do that, then you will get the reward from their Lord. Those people who do that, they will get the reward from their Lord, who is Allah. They will have no fear and they will not be sad. Meaning on the day of judgment, you're not going to have to worry about anything, because everyone else is going to be worried, but these good deeds will come back and help them. And they will not be sad, they will not be worried or concerned or afraid or have any problems on the day of judgment. Because the more good deeds you have, the less worries you're going to have. So it's mentioning that, say, people who do this, they're going to be fine on the day of judgment. But He gives two warnings here. The first verse, the verse before this, already said when you spend your wealth for the cause of Allah, you get all this extra reward. And then it says, you spend your reward for Allah, you spend your wealth for Allah, you're gonna be good, but be very careful of two common things that people do to mess up their charity. How can you mess up your charity? And it's very common among people who give charity, or at least it's the temptation is very common among people who give charity. One of them is reminders of generosity. So even if you give to somebody and then 1 year later, you go and you start telling your people, look how much money I gave to the people over there, right? Or look how much I donated to this masjid, I donated to this Islamic cause. The best form of charity is the one that is completely concealed. Nobody else knows about it. In fact, so much so that the Prophet, peace be upon him, he said that when your right hand gives, your left hand shouldn't even know. And this is an exaggeration, but it's a form of hyperbole. Right? Actually, exaggeration is not a good translation. In Arabic, it's called mubalagha. Mubalagha has two meanings: exaggeration and hyperbole. Hyperbole is a linguistic device where you exaggerate something for effect, right? It's not a negative form of exaggeration. So your left hand doesn't know what your right hand gave. So first of all, when you eat, you're supposed to generally eat with your right hand and all that as much as you can. When you give, you do good things with your right hand. So when you give money, you're giving with your right hand. And he's like, keep it so secret, as if the other hand that's so close, your hands are close to each other, as if the other hand doesn't even know. Of course, the other hand's going to know. It's going to see. It doesn't have eyes, but it's watching, right? But it means try and keep it so secret that try not to let anybody else know. Now, is that always possible? No. Maybe one person will find out, second person will find out, but try to keep it as private as possible and restrict telling people who are on a need-to-know basis. So if you hand it to the person who's going to process the money for you, of course, they need to know that your name's on a check or something like that. Other than that, you don't go around and be like waving your check. Look what I'm giving. It's not the case. So number one, don't have reminders of your generosity, either to the person that you gave to or to anyone else about that you are a generous person, because that becomes showing off and that messes up your intention. And number two is hurtful words. The hurtful words are to the person that you're giving to. So hurtful words are the way in which you give something matters very much. Like in our culture, when you give a gift, it's supposed to be like in a decent packaging or a nice packaging, right? If you can. So people, what do? They wrap up a gift and they make it kind of look nice. Imagine someone comes and, just thinking of an example that's not so bad, but I imagine they come in crumpled up newspaper that's like dirty, and they wrap the gift inside that, and it's like slimy and it's like dripping something, and you're like, here's a gift for you, and you're like, the gift is really nice inside, charity, but like the packaging is like just disgusting and it's nasty, and you're like, this is horrible, right? That's what charity followed up by this bad packaging of like, okay, here, I'm giving you this charity, okay? Hopefully it's the last time. I hope Allah gets you out of this situation. Horrible words, right? So you should refrain from speaking any type of harsh words. And sometimes it happens to people. Sometimes you're giving charity and you're like, I don't like the way the person asked me, or I don't like the circumstance, of this person. I think that they might do this, they might do that. Remove all of those thoughts from your mind. Remove all of those thoughts from your heart. Give charity from the sincerity of your heart for Allah, and you don't worry about the rest. So he says, these are the two temptations that people have. Don't fall into these traps. It'll mess up your charity. Next verse. قَوْلٌ مَعْرُوفٌ وَمَغْفِرَةٌ خَيْرٌ مِّن صَدَقَةٍ يَتْبَعُهَا أَذَى. Kind words and forgiveness are better than charity, followed by hurtful words, right? So in this context here, kind words and forgiveness is better than if you give charity and you mess it up. So let's say you can't give charity. You have two options, right? You have option number one, say, I'm going to give charity, but then I'm going to say something really nasty. The option number two, I'm not going to give charity, but I'm not going to say something nasty. And of course, option three, the best is give charity and don't say anything bad at all. Just be nice. That's ideal. But you know what? If you can't do this, what's ideal, if you had to choose between the two lesser options, Allah is saying this one is better. It's better you don't give charity and you don't say anything bad than if you give charity and say something bad. Why? Because saying something bad is so bad that it's better if you had not given charity in the first place. Now, why? What are kind words? Kind words is if somebody's asking, they're like, look, I really need help. Or even let's say somebody's begging and you're like, okay, the way that they're asking me, you can't give, you don't want to give for whatever reason, a kind word is better. A kind statement is better. So you know what? I'm really sorry. I would like to help you out, but I can't help you out today. And you walk away. Kind word, something nice. Even at least you said something nice was almost like an act of charity in the sense that at least it was a smile. At least they can get a smile, right? And forgiveness, right? Forgiveness can mean two potential things here. One of them is when you say kind words and say, sorry, I can't help you out, please forgive me, one type of forgiveness. Second type of forgiveness, which most of the scholars have addressed this, they said this interpretation, if somebody asks you very rudely, they grab you, imagine they grab you by the shirt, and this happened to the Prophet, peace upon him. People would come, they'd grab him, they'd be like, give me some money. Like, not a very nice thing to do. Now imagine somebody comes and asks you and grabs you like that, and you get upset. You're like, how dare this person grab my shirt? How could they ask me like that? And what you do is, the better thing is kind words, sorry, I can't help you, and forgiveness, pardon the way in which they asked. It's not right of them, but let it go. Why you let it go? Because that's better for you than giving charity followed by hurtful words, because you're so mad. You're like, you know what? Okay, here's some money. Don't you ever touch my shirt again, right? Don't ever do that again. It's not nice. So it's better, good behavior and a refraining from bad behavior is better than charity that comes with bad behavior. And this is actually a general principle in Islamic law. So in Islamic law, there's like scholars are trying to formulate, well, what happens in this situation or what happens in this situation? So there's one general principle, it's called a legal maxim. And the legal maxim here is that preventing harm takes precedence over doing good, right? So if you have the opportunity to like, hey, I can help this person by, if I do this thing, it's going to cause a lot of good. But then this other thing is going to cause a lot of harm, which I can only pick one of them. Which one should I do? Stopping harm is more important and gets precedence over doing something good for somebody else, right? So that's the general principle, and we see that principle taking effect in this statement of the Quran here. Wallahu ghaniyyun halim. Allah is self-sufficient and patient. So ghani means rich. And in the context of Allah, we don't use the word rich, because whenever a word in Arabic is used and it's describing people, it can have one context. But when it's describing Allah, Allah is infinite. Allah is not bound by time. Allah is not bound by space. Allah doesn't have the limitations that human beings have. So even if you know a little bit of Arabic, you need to think about, hey, how does this attribute apply to Allah in the right context? Like, Allah is al-mutakabbir, right? Mutakabbir means a person who's arrogant. That's very bad. Arrogance is a very bad trait. But when we talk about Allah being that quality, it means that Allah it's the greatness of Allah, because Allah is the only one who has that greatness, who deserves this. It's not a negative trait for Allah to be grand and to be great, right? So the negative traits will apply to creation, not to the creator. So when it says Allah is ghani, it means Allah is self-sufficient, because being wealthy or being rich means that you're supposed to not be in need. The richer you are, the less in need you are of something else. Allah is the absolutely say wealthy, meaning he's not in need of anything at all. So in this context, it means Allah doesn't need your charity. Allah is ghani. Allah, if you're giving charity, you're like, look, I'm doing this for you, Allah is not benefiting from your charity. You're benefiting from your charity. The other person is benefiting in one sense, and you're benefiting yourself, but you're not benefiting Allah. So you better follow the rules of charity. Otherwise, what are you doing it for? And Allah is Halim. Allah is patient, right? So why mention Halim in this context, right? So it mentioned something where if somebody does something bad, hurtful words, right? You're going to be held accountable for the hurtful words that you do. But Allah is Halim, Allah is patient, meaning he gives time for people to change their ways, repent and all that. So even if someone is committing a sin was mentioned in the verse. And you'll find this a lot. So if a sin is mentioned in the verse and then it says Allah is patient or forbearing, meaning he gives time for people. He's not going to punish them immediately. You get some time to think about whether you want to change your ways or not. It's very suitable to put this at the end of the verse as well. 264. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تبطلوا صدقاتكم بالمن والأذى كالذي ينفق ماله رئاء الناس ولا يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر. Believers, do not waste your charity with reminders of your generosity or with hurtful words, like those who give their wealth just to show off and do not believe in Allah or the last day. So it's another emphasis one more time. Is that, listen, believers, you are spending your money, but you can nullify that with reminders of your generosity, which was already addressed, hurtful words, which was already addressed, and now like those people who give their wealth to show off. So there's a third quality here, and that is showing off. So reminders of your generosity is connected, but if a reminder of generosity is to the person you're giving it to, that's one thing. And if you're showing off to other people, that's in like almost another category. It's like a third trait. So don't do that. You know what type of people do that? People who don't believe in Allah or the last day. So here it's two things. Number one, it's referring to, remember, this is in Medina. The Muslims are spending their wealth in the cause of Allah. They are also at war with the idol worshippers from the Quraysh and other people who don't believe in Allah properly, and they don't believe in the last day. But saying those people, when they spend their money, most of them are doing it to show off, and they don't believe in Allah or the last day. But you people are believers. You believe in Allah. You believe in the last day. You believe you're going to be held accountable in front of Allah. So don't be like those other people. You're supposed to be of a higher standard. You're supposed to have the right intention because you have the right beliefs. So be careful about that. فمثله كمثل صفوان عليه تراب فأصابه وابل فتركه صلدا. Their example, meaning the example of those people who don't believe in Allah in the last day and they're showing off with their wealth, their example is that of a smooth rock covered with a thin layer of soil. It's hit by a strong rain and just a bare stone is left, and just a bare stone is left. Okay, so that's the wording of the Quran. Now, what does that mean? This example may be a little bit difficult to understand. So if you take a rock, and imagine there's different types of rocks. There's like jagged rocks, and there's, imagine like a boulder, and it's got like some cups, like some little dips in it and stuff like that. If rain comes and it falls on a rock that has like some indents and all of that, the water is going to remain in the rock, right? Now imagine if the rock is smooth, there are no craters, no indentations or anything like that. If it rains, all the water just comes off. So it's completely smooth. So that's what it means, smooth. I mean, it's not going to hold anything. If you put on top of it, it's just going to slide right off. So it's a smooth rock. And it's got a thin layer of soil. Like it's got a little layer of dust, but like some soil on top, right? And we were just talking about the corn seed being planted in soil and growing into 7 ears, 700 grains of corn. So we're talking about soil. Now imagine you have to have good soil. You put the one seed in there, you get 700 sprouting out. Now imagine you got a thin, smooth layer of rock where nothing can really stay on, barely any. Imagine you got a little bit of soil somehow came on top of the rocks, a little bit dirt came on top of the rock. How much soil do you have to work with? You got almost nothing. There's like this super thin layer of soil on a smooth rock, which you can't plant a piece of corn in there. Imagine you put a piece of corn in there, like, I'm going to get some reward. There's like almost nothing there. So they want to grow seeds in that little soil that's super thin. And then what comes on top of that? A strong rain comes down. And normally what would happen if you have a good rain, it's going to help the thing grow. But guess what happens in this case? It washes away all the soil and just flows away, and they lose everything. So even though the soil was very shallow to begin with, they put in this effort. They're trying to put a corn seed and everything, and now it's completely gone. It's nothing. So they didn't have much to begin with, and now whatever happened, it's all wasted. So when the charity is done with bad intentions, this is exactly what happens. When the charity is with good intentions, it's like nice, good, deep soil. Put it in there, it's going to grow and multiply 700 times. When the intention is bad and the beliefs are bad, it's like the super thin layer of soil. You're not going to grow much anyways. And on top of that, when the water comes like it's supposed to, messes up the entire thing because everything is wrong about it. The intention is wrong. لا يقدرون على شيء مما كسبوا. They are unable to get any reward from their efforts. Imagine someone's trying to grow something on this little thin layer of soil. They're putting all this effort in, they're bringing the seeds and they're stacking it. All of that work, nothing, completely wasted. So the same thing, people who are giving their effort, they're like, I'm giving in charity, I'm giving my money, but it's all the wrong intention and the wrong beliefs. All that effort goes to vain. وَاللَّهُ لَا يَهْدِي الْقَوْمَ الْكَافِرِينَ. Allah does not guide disbelieving people. And in this context, it means such, like these type of disbelieving people who are doing these type of things. Next verse. وَمَثَلُ الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ ابْتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ اللَّهِ وَتَثْبِيتًا مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ كمثل جنة بربوة أصابها وابل فآتت أكلها ضعفين فإن لم يصبها وابل فطل. The example of those who spend their wealth seeking Allah's pleasure and believing that the reward is certain. So two things here. Number one, you're doing it for Allah. Number two, tathbit here means you have certainty that I know Allah is going to reward me. This is very, very important. So when you're having patience with something, you're going through some difficulty, you also need to have certainty and firmness, conviction that I know Allah is going to reward me. So two conditions, right? So here, when you're spending, sincerity for Allah. Number two, you know that Allah is going to reward you. And when you do that, it's like a garden on a hill. So imagine a garden is up, it's the opposite of the little rock. There's a garden up on a hill. Heavy rain falls on it and it produces double the fruit that it would normally produce. So why? Because high, it gets a little bit more rain. It's in perfect circumstances. You get a bunch of fruit because of the sincerity of the intention that the person is doing. If a heavy rain doesn't fall, even a light rain is enough. It's still going to produce a good amount of fruit because it has excellent soil. It's in the right location. It's like fertile land. You have the land in the right place, going to grow even if you get a little bit the right circumstance. You have soil on a rock in the wrong place, you're not going to get anything. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. He's saying that's the example of people who are doing it correctly. Wallahu bima ta'maluna basir. Allah sees all that you do. And he knows the purity of your motives, and he's going to reward you according to that, or you have your deeds go to waste depending on that. أيود أحدكم أن تكون له جنة من نخيل وأعناب تجري من تحتها الأنهار له فيها من كل الثمرات. Would any of you wish to have a garden with palm trees, grapevines, and rivers flowing through with all kinds of fruits that are growing there? Right? Now, the average person would be like, yeah, that'd be great. Now, today, we're a little bit disconnected from nature. It would be like, no, I want like a video game room with the big screen TV and all this stuff. Assuming people still have the fitrah, the natural way of connecting with things, they'd be like, you have like a nice garden. It's got palm trees, date palm trees, give you like fresh dates, they look beautiful. We're in California, we have nice palm trees and stuff. Grapevines, got some grapes, you can just grab them. This is among the descriptions of paradise, right? You got rivers flowing through, like the water's right there, fresh, sweet, tastes good, clean, pure, not polluted, right? And you got all these fruits growing there, and you could just enjoy yourself. Wouldn't you love to have a garden like that? Most people would be like, of course, I would love to have that garden. So then Allah is going to give an example about that. He says, وَأَصَابَهُ الْكِبْرُ وَلَهُ ذُرِّيَّةٌ ضُعَفَاءُ فَأَصَابَهَا إِعْصَارٌ فِيهِ نَارٌ فَاحْتَرَقَتْ. But then as you grow very old and you cannot work anymore, so when you get old, very, very old, you can't take care of this garden anymore. And you have weak little children. Weak little children, they cannot work and they cannot help you either. So you're really badly in need of some help here, of this garden and this fruit and all that stuff. And then a fiery whirlwind hits the garden. So this whirlwind comes, hits the garden, burns up the entire thing and destroys it. Right? So this is an example that Allah gives. Right? So basically, you are old and you're in need and it's gone. Your kids are young, they can't help you, and they're in need, and it's all gone. So everything, so you had this beautiful thing, beautiful garden. And I imagine charity is a beautiful thing. And you're going to need the good deeds on the day of judgment from that charity. But then you lose all of it. It's all gone. It's all destroyed like this beautiful garden, right? And what's interesting is I was looking into these whirlwinds, by the way. So this a tornado. There's a tornado, which is like a massive whirlwind, and then there's like smaller little winds. And there's actually something known as it's called a fire whirl. Has anyone heard this before? All right. So this is a fire. It's called a fire whirl, and it's actually like a little mini type of tornado, which actually has fire inside of it. And this happened, and it actually happened just a few years ago here in California. Happened twice here in California. The 2019 fires, I think, there was a fire whirl which came and just started decimating a lot of the property around here. So this is something that's well known, and it burns up and it starts spinning, and the fire inside of it. See, not only is it destroying, like a tornado can destroy, the whirlwind can destroy things, but if you add fire on top of that, it destroys it even faster. So this thing will just completely destroy everything in its path. Whole garden is completely gone. So Allah is explaining, he's like, look, wouldn't you love to have something beautiful like this? We're like, yeah. He's like, imagine now you're in need of this, and all of a sudden it gets completely destroyed, and everyone's in need of this, and it's gone. كذلك يبين الله لكم الآيات لعلكم تتفكرون. This is how Allah makes His revelations clear to you so that you might think. Now you connect the verse, the part before and the part after. You say, what's in between here? What's a lesson here? So Allah is giving this example and He's saying, look, somebody who shows off with their charity, they're not going to have their good deeds on the day of judgment, even though they're badly in need of them. The same way that this elderly person and their young kids are badly in need of that garden now, it's all gone. So make sure that when you spend, make sure that you have the right intention. You're going to need those deeds on the day of judgment. All right. Questions? Yeah.
Make an intention, and along the line, for instance, zakat, intention, and then along the line, if you decided to after you give that donation, not an issue with that.
Zakat is not a donation. Zakat is a mandated. Yeah.
Also, they wanted to give up the zakat for a little bit later, for instance, with that or not.
You make your intention to give zakat, and then you change your intention to say, I'm not going to give it, I'm going to give it later. So let's say for a regular charity, okay, for regular charity, you're like, I'm going to give something in charity, and then you stop and you say, you know what, I think I'm going to give it a little bit later. I might need this money for now. I'm going to give the charity a little bit later. That's fine. No, you can do that. With zakat, you can't do that. The zakat has a due date every single year. You have to pay that zakat, and it cannot be delayed. So they're two different scenarios. But if you have delayed charity, you say, I'm going to give it a little bit later, although I wanted to give it now, doesn't mean that you're insincere. Right? If you're like, look, I really need to, buy this other thing, but inshallah, I'm going to give it later. That doesn't necessitate insincerity. Of course, you can always renew your intention. You can always renew it. No, not after it's given. No, not after. You can't backdate intentions. So cannot backdate intentions. All right. All right, cool. Any other questions? Yeah.
Good question. So I went to Umar like a couple months ago.
Mm.
Went to Mecca and Medina, right? With my mom. And so around Mecca and Kaaba, obviously there's a lot of workers. Well, I went to a bunch of cash jobs, but any money, people around there. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also a lot of people, both in Medina and Mecca, they kind of come up to you and they're kind of poor and they're asking for money, like quite a bit of money sometimes. And I have like an uncle who lives there, and it's kind of like I don't want to say scheme or scam or whatever you want to call it, but like so they kind of run all over the place. So like I mean, like my first time with Irvine, I was just pretty much anybody was asking me, I was just giving money to everybody as much as I could. Because obviously my intention was good and I wanted to, but then I had my mom say no because this guy is, he's lying, he's trying to run a scam, and then he's coming up to them like fake crying, that kind of stuff. What do you do in that situation? Because I know at the end of the day my intention is good. I mean, I don't care if he's lying or not lying. That's not my prerogative.
Mm.
The fact I would see him and ask me, what would you do in that situation?
Yeah. So the thing is, if you know somebody is lying, they're running a charity scheme, right? You shouldn't give to them. If you have a suspicion that they're lying, but you can't prove it, if you give the charity to them and it turns out that they were lying, you will still get the reward for your deed, right? That's you and Allah. You're going to get the reward, and they're going to be held accountable for what it is. Oftentimes you cannot tell for sure. So if you have a very, very strong reason to believe that they are not genuine, you shouldn't give. If you have a very weak suspicion, you're like, I think maybe because the way they look or something like that, you're like, you don't know, you don't really have much other evidence, then you might want to err on the side of caution and say, this person can be genuinely poor and maybe they're really in need and I'll be one of the people who can give. So you try to use your best judgment. Sometimes it's hard when it's like 50-50, but when you know they're most probably faking it, you shouldn't give. And if you don't know and you're like, I'm really not sure, you can give, right?
Yeah, and you Mustafa, it's Mecca, the center of religion. You're going to see very obviously what it's not lying.
No, but you see, you don't make your decision based upon that. So you have to use a correct criteria to figure out whether someone is. So oftentimes locals will know a little bit more about the culture, and they can kind of tell that, hey, there's been a shipment of people who have come in recently that usually they're known to belong to a type of gang. Like, for example, this happens in some masjids around here in this area where they're known as like gypsies. They're people. Yes, exactly. So there, yeah, you should not. You should not. The reason why you should not is because the people are well known, number one. Number two, people have followed them to their cars and they're getting into like Mercedes vehicles and stuff like that, right? I myself have seen, I literally followed them sometimes. So they're doing that, you know, and they're, most of them are not Muslim. So they're pretending and they're well known. The investigations have happened about them. And lastly, they can always walk inside the door and no one gets turned away for funds. So they could always apply, but they don't want to walk in the door and get the funds. So the funds are there. All you got to do is just walk inside and ask, right? And you'll get the funding. So in a case like that, you should not give. And no matter how many times we tell people not to give, they still keep giving, you know, or they don't get, they're not paying attention to the announcements or whatever it is. So if you have a very, very good reason to believe that it's not genuine, you should not be giving, right? But if someone's like, I think that person looks like somebody I knew one time who was faking it, that's not a good reason, right? Just give it to them anyways. Okay. All right. You're welcome. All right. Any other questions? Yeah.
The verse would say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala والله يضاعف لمن يشاء. هل في معنى آخر يعني فوق ال700 ضعف؟
Yeah. So there is a second meaning that scholars have given about the verse, which says Allah gives, you know, to whomever He wills. You know, Allah multiplies to whomever He wills. One meaning is that He can give up to 700 to whomever He wills. The other meaning is that Allah gives 700 and He can give way more than that. He can give 1400, He can give 2100. He can do way more above and beyond that as well. So this verse could also carry that meaning. Okay. All right. We will see you next week then, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum.